Let me read to you a passage from the 13th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 1 to 15. It's the Gospel for Holy Thursday, the Mass of the Lord's Supper during Holy Week. St. John writes, "It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' Jesus replied, 'You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand.' 'No,' said Peter, 'you shall never wash my feet.' Jesus answered, 'Unless I wash you, you have no part with me.' 'Then, Lord,' Simon Peter replied, 'not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well.' Jesus answered, 'A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you.' For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, 'Not every one of you are clean.' When he had finished washing their feet, he put his clothes on and returned to his place. 'Do you understand what I have done for you?' he asked. 'You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done for you.'" That's from John chapter 13, verses 1 to 15. What does it suggest to us? Well, it tells us about Jesus, the divine servant. You know, in ancient civilizations, where sandals were the footwear and dust and dirt a feature of roads, a host commonly offered to provide water for a guest to wash his feet. An example of this is given when Abraham received the 3 men by the terebinth of Mamre in Genesis chapter 18, verse 4. Alternatively, a servant might wash the feet of the guest. And we read in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 4, how Abigail, referring to herself as David's handmaid, says that she would become a slave to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. On one occasion, our Lord accepted the invitation of a Pharisee to dine with him. The Pharisee omitted the courtesy of offering our Lord water to wash his feet. But during the meal, a woman entered the house, a woman with a poor reputation in the town, and proceeded to wash his feet with her tears and dry them with her hair. She then anointed his feet with her perfumed oil. She was showing him signal love and honor. Our Lord accepted her courtesy and sent her away with her sins forgiven. And we remember how, after our Lord raised Lazarus from the dead, a dinner was held in his honor in the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. When all were reclining at table, Mary came in with a pint of pure nard to the value of nearly a year's wages, and poured it over the feet of Jesus. She was, as a host, washing the feet of Jesus, not just with water, but with a most valuable substance. The aroma filled the entire house, as she wiped the feet of Jesus not just with a towel, but with her hair. By her hair, she was, as it were, taking the place of the towel that wiped his feet. She was humbly bestowing the highest honor on our Lord that was within her power. The gesture of washing the feet was a mark of genuine humility by the host and of high honor to the guest. In our gospel today that I read earlier, our Lord, whom the disciples addressed as Master and Lord, and rightly so our Lord said, "For that is what I am," knelt before each of his disciples and proceeded to wash their feet. It symbolized Christ being a servant, a slave. It was too much for Simon Peter. "Lord, you shall never wash my feet," he said. Ponder the scene and contemplate what it tells us of the one and only God. It is extraordinary enough, wondrous beyond words, that God is in the midst of this group as a man. This man, whom they addressed as Master and Lord, with whom Peter felt he could expostulate, was the living God, the God of all things visible and invisible. Through him all things were made, and in him was life, the source of life for all living things. There he stood, there he sat, there he conversed in his humanity. The great God, so high a God as to transcend all things in every respect, had taken to himself a human nature and thus made himself our brother. But lo, he rises from the table and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. The gesture was unmistakable in its significance. God was acting as a humble servant, as a servant would act towards an honoured guest. That is the attitude of God towards the living work of his hands. The highest and most exalted reality of all is humble and loving. This reality at its most exalted is humble and serving. Our Lord was revealing to his disciples what it is to be like God. Simon Peter refused, for it was, he thought, demeaning to the one whom he so loved and venerated. He could not accept that his very feet be washed by his Master and his Lord. But he had to accept it, if Jesus was to be his Master and Lord at all. For Jesus, the Master, was the predicted suffering servant who would take away the sins of the world. "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me," our Lord said. "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath need only wash his feet. His whole body is clean." Our Lord had come to wash the feet of mankind, making himself the servant of all men, making them clean all over. That was his grand mission, to make humanity clean of sin and endowed with a share in his own life. His disciples, with Simon Peter at their head, would have the mission of bringing Jesus Christ to the world, so that in him the world would be made new. Let us understand well what it means to be like God. It means to be like Jesus Christ, who put aside the divine glory that had been his, to become as men are, and humbler still, even to death on the cross. He became the servant of all, and his final gesture at the Last Supper, washing the feet of his disciples, and just imagine our Lord's emotion as he washed the feet of Judas Iscariot, showed forth who he really was and what he had come to do. He was the God of all love, and he had come to make mankind clean. Let us take our stand with him and strive every day to do as he did.